This is take 3 of Ecclesiastes 4, Darren. We've tried to keep doing this, but like this chapter is complicated because there's so many themes
Yes.
going on as Solomon is trying to find out the purpose and meaning of life. And he just seems like he's rambling, but he's not. There is a method to his madness here. And so we are going to talk about Christian contentment, envy, and jealousy, because that theme seems to ring through this chapter. Would you say so, Darren? Would you say that's where we're going?
Throughout the whole of Ecclesiastes, I think that you have to read it with an eye towards contentment, because
Oh, that's good.
yeah, I mean everything that he's zeroing in on, where he continues this refrain of this is vanity striving after the wind. I mean, it leaves you feeling empty and it leaves you feeling discontent because you at some point believed that this was going to be the thing that was going to give your life meaning, that you could sort of gel around, and it doesn't happen. Work, pleasure, sex, relationships, status, power, whatever the case may be, it ultimately is a vanity, a striving after the wind. It's a mist. And we
Right.
find it again in Ecclesiastes 4, which just seems to be this compilation of a whole bunch of scenarios where that same issue, that same difficulty, rears its ugly head once again.
It's almost like he's recognizing that, like, all these worldly motivations for why we pursue things are vanity, you know? And so, again, like earlier, he talked about pursuing pleasure or hard work. And it's this back and forth between it's good to work hard, it's good to have pleasure, yet that can't be the underlying motive. So here, again, there's a lot of themes, talks about oppression, talks about a king, he talks about a lot of things, but like you see this in verse 4. Then I saw that all toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. And you jump down to verse 8. One person who has no other, either sons or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with his riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and unhappy business. So, you know, here he's looking at the motivation of maybe comparison. You know, again, all the skill and work comes from man's envy of his neighbor, and so trying to keep up with the Joneses. And isn't this just a natural part of human life, and honestly a very significant part of American life, where everybody wants what his neighbor has? You know, you think of social media, Darren, and everybody's portraying, seems like two things. One, outrage, but the other is, look at how good my life is. And, you know, all the selfies. And I used to say, when the selfie was first a thing, maybe in 2008 when the iPhone came out or whatever, like I used to tell my students, because I was a teacher, I was taking perfect selfies when you had to get film developed, because I have these long arms. And I would turn the camera around, and I would,
Yeah.
you know, pose with my wife or pose with myself and snap on. You'd have to do a couple, because you'd have to wait now, you know, to get
You'd
this
have
thing.
no idea how it would turn out. You'd have to wait a week for them to develop the film.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
But now it's like, it's so easy, and I take selfies all the time, so I'm not down on the selfie. But when you look at everybody's social media feed, that's what you're seeing. Look at how great everybody's life is, and there's comparison there, and there's envy there, and there's seeking and striving after trying to look better than the next person or accomplish more than the next person. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I so many reasons, but I think at the end of the day, we want heaven now. We want glory for ourselves. We want the pleasures of heaven, the peace of heaven, the we don't we fear. Well, I mean, then there's also the fear of what might feel like death to us. So poverty or embarrassment or or being suffering some sort of lack. We fear those things. We fear the loss of the good things that we have, and we feel as if we in this life must have more of the things, to which it becomes something that we will only have in heaven. That's why we're never satisfied, because we're made for heaven, and yet we can never get it here. And
Right.
so the toiling. Does the Bible teach that we ought to work hard? Yes, of course. We ought to be good stewards of the gifts and the skills that God has given to us. We ought to seek to provide and for our families and better their lives, and have the resources to be able to care for others well. I mean, yeah, all of those things. I mean, absolutely. But it's this notion that we ought to just so pour ourselves into whatever it is, we become so zeroed in upon it that it just consumes our life, and we pursue it because we desire heaven, because we think that on the other side, if we can just cross this next threshold, then that will be the heavenly life, and it just isn't. And so when it's not, what happens is that we just have this sense of discontentment and disillusionment, and discontentment. I mean, there ought to be I think there ought to be a holy discontentment with the world, and certainly of our own lives and our own sanctification, that we long for something better, we strive for something better, yes, to all of that, but a deep seated into the bone marrow of our lives discontent is saying, God is not giving me my due, and I need to therefore make up for what is lacking in the grace of God through work, or through whatever pursuit the case may be, even very good things. And it's all vanity and striving after mist, that is striving after wind that's going to shift and change with every moment.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, and maybe I'll get the quote wrong, but comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of contentment. So God gives us all things we need in life, and certainly, there are those who struggle and who need more. But for the most part, like in America, we all have what we need.
But
again, like
about,
you're saying,
credit card debt right now, and how much the whole, it's expensive to live. I mean, there's certainly
I can't believe how expensive it is. I come out of stores and little fast food places now, and I'm like, wow, it all just step level got expensive.
Right. You go to the
Yeah.
grocery store and you come out of there with 3 bags of things, and you spend $100.
Yeah.
I mean,
So in that sense, it's fine. It's okay to want to earn more and maximize our earning potential. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, it goes back to the motivation here. So when he says comes from a man's envy of his neighbor, it goes back to, we think life is a zero-sum game. Game. So, I need to do better than the next guy, when that really has nothing to do with anything, and even with DEI programs and this whole idea of equity, that outcomes are supposed to be the same. It's that's not, the Bible doesn't show that. Even when you talk of
Right.
Jesus in the parable of the talents, and one guy gets 10 talents and one guy gets 1 talent, and it's what you do with what you're given. It's not about getting more than the next person. And I think when you and I were talking about like Cain and Abel before take one and take two of this recording, that was like really like the first time we've ever done that.
I know.
We got like 10 minutes in, and I was just like,
This is a bit
I don't know
bad.
why anybody would listen to this. But like Cain and Abel, like, why does Cain kill Abel? Like, Abel made a good sacrifice, Cain didn't, and well, there was jealousy and envy there. God wasn't Cain. There's no evidence that that Abel was holding it over Cain's head. Abel just did what pleased God, and Cain killed him because of his own anger at not being accepted by God. And I think we can relate this to salvation, honestly, where we don't really get grace, and we don't really get how we're made right with God. We still, in our inner being, think we just have to be better than the next guy, and that's not God's standard. God's standard is perfection, and we'll never be good enough just by being better than the next guy. And but God does give us all things that we need, and Jesus says that. Don't be worried about what you'll eat, what you'll wear. Look at the fields; they're clothed better than Solomon, and God feeds the birds, and won't He care for you? And I think ultimately that dissatisfaction, it does point to we're not happy with how God is superintending things in our life. We're ultimately upset with God, I think, when we are jealous of others.
Yeah, right. We feel like what did they do to deserve what I perceive to be something better, them having something better than myself. I deserve it. God has somehow shortchanged me, and that is absolutely not the case. I mean, when you look at the people's wealth, or people's family life, or people's their physical health, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's always going to be someone that's better off than yourself, and so I mean, that's just a bottomless pit of despair. I mean, it's all about who you're comparing yourself to, and we can't go about doing that. We need to be thankful for the gifts that God's given us, the position that God's given us. We can seek to better it, and strive for the glory of God. I mean, keep your eyes on. I think at the end of the day, and we find it at the end of Ecclesiastes, fear God and keep His commands. For that is the whole sum of man. Glorify Him and enjoy Him. Keep your eyes on Christ, and you will be content in circumstances that aren't always going to bring about contentment. Plus, we need to remember that when we do see other people, we see what seems to be this prosperous, pleasurable, healthy. We see them having this wonderful life. We don't. There's a lot that we don't know as well. I mean, there are a lot of people with just colossal struggles and difficulties and hardships and sadnesses and losses. I mean, these things that don't always display themselves out in the open for all of us to see. Even with people that we're pretty intimately connected to, there's just an internal hardship that people face that we're unaware of, and that that perhaps I'm not dealing with, and I ought to be thankful that I'm not dealing with. God has spared me and maybe enriched me in a way that I don't understand, and we ought to be thankful for those gifts and not live with such envy.
Yeah. I mean, as we're talking about this, Jeremiah, I think Jeremiah 2, but Jeremiah is coming to mind where he says, my people have committed two great evils. They've rejected me, the fountain of living water, and they've hewn for themselves wells or cisterns that hold no water. And so we have everything we need in God's provision and in Christ as we understand, this side of the cross. And yet we seek that satisfaction in these other things. And again, that goes to verse 8. And there's no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? And so there's this idea of the man, Jesus tells the parable, who has so much stuff, he builds larger buildings to hold his stuff, and then he dies. And
Right.
Solomon ponders that, and then people die. But I think, if there's a connection here, and you and I spoke of this earlier, not recorded, it's, he talks earlier about oppression and oppressors who are oppressing the oppressed. And that too is about this. It's about seeking to accumulate wealth, power, prestige, whatever, at the expense of others. Again, this idea of a zero-sum game. And where he kind of turns the corner, I think, it's in this great 9, 10, 11, and 12, which we quote completely out of the context of Ecclesiastes 4, because it just seems so weird that it's here. But I think the point is, rather than being in competition with others or seeking to benefit ourselves either at the expense of others or regardless of others, how much better is community? So he talks about two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. So certainly if you're just striving after, your own accumulation, you're not working in partnership, but how much more can you accomplish with somebody else? For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Of course, in our context, we don't understand that, but you can imagine, in that world, what that would be like. And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So it talks about the compounding effect of cooperation. And, again, we think of Psalm. Man, I knew, is it Psalm 113 or whatever? No, it's not. But anyway, how good it is when brothers dwell together in unity,
Yeah, and Psalm 134, I think.
Psalm 134, okay. 133 or 134?
It's 130 something.
Okay.
It's one of the
it's
two.
Probably
of those,
none of those, but no, I think you're right. So he's looking and he says, something in the human condition puts us in competition, in jealousy, in envy, in comparison, but we're made to do this together. And we know that when we experience it, and yet there's still always this thing where we want to do it by ourselves.
Right. Yeah. We don't want help. We're very reticent to ask for help and to work together. I think this is a colossal social problem in the world today, in America, wherein the church can really provide a great counter witness to this if we seek to live it out. Because I mean, there's of course a hyper individualism in American culture, but I mean, you just think people are not getting married, people are not having children. The birth rate is just at a tremendous low. And I think there's the sense that marriage, that commitment, having children, being involved in any sort of, organized gathering of people, and in that sense, it's constraining. It restricts your freedom. Whatever it might be. I mean, it restricts your ability to earn income and move up because you got to be responsible for others. In the end, it's a very lonely life. It's a lonely life. It's devoid of the good gifts that God has given us of relationship, which are sometimes very hard. Being a parent's hard. Being husband or a wife is hard. Being in relationship with anybody can be very difficult if the relationship's beyond substance. And what is happening socially? We've got just a whole culture of very lonely, very isolated people who, and the more lonely and the more isolated you become, the more weirded out you come. You just go to the fringes and you say and do and participate in things that are just not only odd but totally self-destructive. And when we are in relationship with one another, and particularly when you think about being in relationship with people in the local church, some of whom are going to drive you bananas, some of whom are very difficult, but nonetheless you realize that you are brothers and sisters, you're family because you've been bought with the same blood of Christ, you're united together because of what Christ has done for you. You join together and you maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond. It's a bond of peace, and you reflect something of a beautiful work of God in a community of people who otherwise would be inclined to go the way of all flesh, which is just into hyper-isolation mode, and which ends up very lonely. I mean, if you're 25, 35 years old, and you're working to the bone, and you don't have children, and you don't have any other people any other expenses to cover other than your own, I mean, you can live a somewhat prosperous life and be able to go out and float your own boat and partake of as much pleasure as you want without, supposedly consequence free. Think about when you get to be 50, 60, 70 years old. I mean, you've been there and done that. And you've so isolated yourself, even though you might be around a lot of people, but it's possible that you've just isolated yourself to such a degree that you end up with a very lonely life. And the Lord has saved us not only into himself, but he saved us into his people, because he knows that we need each other to be stirred towards love and good works and faith in Christ.
Yeah, I think we live in a day and age, to your whole point, that enables that kind of isolation like never before. If you think of like the times before electricity, before technology, electrical technology, like you couldn't really just keep your mind busy with mindlessness.
Right.
But now, like, you could just sit inside in your air conditioning with your phone and scroll through social media or play stupid mindless games all day long, and that replaces human contact and interaction. And it's highly destructive because it's reprogramming our brains and our minds to inoculate us into isolation, and it's not good. And like you said, the church, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, and it's deceptive too, because I mean, some of the scrolling, which I everybody does it. It's not like, okay, that's just an evil thing, don't ever do that. It's that you can get so roped into it to believe that you're almost like around people, or you're seeing what's happening in the world, or you have some sort of vague interaction with people, because it's people that you're scrolling through and they're talking. It's not just total fantasy land. But in the end, you really are isolating yourself. I mean, by not having an actual face-to-face relationship where you got to deal with their junk and they've got to deal with your junk, and you work. There's interaction together with an embodied person. It's like it's like going to church online. You're not going to church online. It's you in your own little cozy space watching a preacher who you are never going to really personally interact with, preaching to people that you're never going to interact with, who are never going to know you and you're not going to know them, because of convenience or whatever the case may be, and you're cheating yourself and you're cheating the church, and you're crippling your own growth and grace that way.
Yeah, I don't know where because I recently listened to a lot of podcasts because I rode my my motorcycle down from North Carolina to Florida 2 days ago, 10 and a half hours on the bike. Listened to a lot of podcasts because I got Bluetooth in my helmet. But I don't know where I heard this. It might have been on the Reforming Men podcast, which is a new podcast by some PCA pastors. And there's a PCA teaching elder who works in a school. His name's Mark Robinson. I think it was him. But if not, sorry, Mark. Not that you would even be listening to this. But, he said it is interesting. Like, men are, we're made for adventure, for agonism, for goals, for, and when we're not made to be sitting in our, adult male sitting in your mom's basement playing video games. But it's interesting how the video games that are being played are often masculine themed, first person shooter games, or like, so it's these men who don't embody masculinity, but they're playing games that are doing, again, masculine things. So to tie it into what we're talking about here, so much of what people do to keep themselves busy and isolated, on so much of what they're doing on their phone is mimicking relational things, but to a screen, Mm-hmm. So it may be, again, scrolling through social media, or like maybe it's arguing on social media. Again, it's this dialogue thing, but like not having, so to your point about worship, it's like, so they're not going to go to worship and be in community, but they'll do it, in some virtual setting, which is, we can't get away from what we're made for. We keep pushing it further and further away, but then the reality is it's trying to accomplish the same thing.
Right.
But anyway, to kind of round the bend on this, he ends this chapter talking about a foolish king, and building once again back on this idea that a person is accumulating and accomplishing things to pass it on to nobody, and so who more to embody that than a king who has all power, all possession, all riches, all everything. He says, there was no end of all the people of whom he led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him.
Right.
Surely this also is vanity and striving after the wind. So the point is, Solomon, again, is he's trying to consider every possible scenario of what the meaning of life is, and he keeps coming up with the same conclusion because everything he's pondering is not built on the right motivations, And then what he does is, in all these chapters, he kind of gets this little gem, In another chapter, it's like, well, it's good to enjoy your hard work, to work hard and then sit back and kind of enjoy the fruit of that, and that is good. And here he talks about it's good to partner with somebody, and there's joy. It's like the little things in life God gives us, not as our motivations, but we ought to enjoy them because life is meaningful, and we have these glimpses of his goodness throughout, and so let's enjoy them. So like you said before, the church is supposed to be a glimpse of that. And I know we can get into all the ways in which the church falls short, but this whole thing just reminds me of, what we talk about in the Reformed world of the ordinary means of grace. Like, we're looking for these extraordinary big things, and God gives us his grace in the ordinary. Of course, word, sacrament, prayer, most sort of specifically, but in general, it's the ordinary in which we find joy. And if we can rightly root where our satisfaction and motivation is, it's in pleasing God And again, you already quoted like sort of the end of Ecclesiastes. Then everything else gets rightly ordered. So that's my final
Right.
word.
Yeah. Well, it's a good word, and so we'll wrap it up there. But that's it's a fascinating chapter, an important one for us to kind of meditate upon and ask the Lord to do a work in our hearts with it, to give us a contentment with what He has given us and for who He is, and to just pull us away from this inclination to strive after win, to make our whole lives about the gifts rather than the giver. And so we do well to pray and strive to those ends by God's grace, and that's what we're about on Grace to Stand. So we will be back again next time as we zero in on Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.